I'm sitting here waiting for some new FPS titles to come out, since I played the Modern Warfare 3 beta recently, and I'll most likely play the game when it comes out. But I'm also curious to see how the upcoming free-to-play FPS game called XDefiant by Ubisoft will play when it finally gets released. The XDefiant release is delayed, but rumors is saying that it will be released at the end of this month, meaning October. Not sure if that's correct though, we have to wait and see. I then started to think about Shatterline, a free-to-play shooter, and that's the gameplay you're watching here in the background that I've covered before on my channel, and a free-to-play title that has been struggling to keep players in the game, at least recently. And what kind of impact will the release of a somewhat similar shooter like XDefiant have on a game such as Shatterline? You might argue and say that, well, Shatterline and XDefiant are different, and to a certain degree that is correct. However, they're both free-to-play shooters, and they will therefore, just by being a free-to-play game, attract about the same kind of audience, meaning players in the world of FPS. Usually when there's some games being released around the same period of time, you have to choose what game you'll play, especially if you're on a budget and we're talking about AAA titles that are stacking up that might cost you around $70 or more per game. The good thing here though, if we forget the new upcoming Call of Duty game, is the fact that both Shatterline and XDefiant are free to play, so it's then possible to play them both if you do like them both, or if you do have the time for it, which is something not everyone has as well. It might be harsh to put a free-to-play FPS title made by a big studio and companies such as Ubisoft against the smaller studios such as FragLab, since we also know that it takes quite some resources, meaning money, if you're also going to be able to market the game properly. And I guess it's a no-brainer to say that Ubisoft most likely have more funds ready compared to FragLabs when it comes to that. Because we all know how important marketing is nowadays. It doesn't matter how good product you have. If people don't know about it, it doesn't matter because they won't find their way to it. This is of course an overall problem when it comes to especially smaller studios marketing their games, or their attempts to do so, at least with the small budget they might have, especially since it's hard to stand out today. Also, there's already so many games out there, meaning competition, but also the difficulty to keep players in the game after release, or months I would say after release, which is a typical window where some people tend to leave. That also requests continuous funds, meaning money, but also good planning when it comes to a future roadmap of the actual game. Shatterline was released in the beginning of September last year, and the devs have after that been doing, I guess, what they can in order to keep up the goodwill around their game, and by making updates and adding some new content. But as I mentioned in my former Shatterline video, it hasn't been enough for some, and there's still things in Shatterline that players would like to see being addressed and changed, but it hasn't been the case so far. Shatterline is also still in early access, and I do believe that they need to release the game for real anytime soon, if it will stand a chance to gain some more players and attraction. But consider then the upcoming releases of games such as XDefiant and Call of Duty, and wait until there's a period of less releases in the genre. Maybe the first quarter of 2024 could be that period, since this is usually a time when a lot of players into the new year are looking for new games, especially those that might be tired playing another Call of Duty title. When I made a video recently about my Modern Warfare 3 beta impressions, I put quite some time into talking about skill-based matchmaking. Both XDefiant and Shatterline will not have skill-based matchmaking in their games, at least not when it comes to casual game modes. This is a win for both games in my book, since a lot of players in the FPS community, at least those that have a kind of a medium or above medium skill level, will most likely appreciate this quite some. So that in itself is a bit of a selling point. However, we should remember though that one big difference between XDefiant and Shatterline is the fact that XDefiant is only PvP, meaning multiplayer, whilst Shatterline also have PvE modes that are appreciated by quite some in their community. This is something I believe can be a bit of a savior to a certain degree when it comes to Shatterline, since it adds something else to the game and will therefore also attract some players that simply aren't that interested in the PvP aspect of the game. So what is to be done here when it comes to a game such as Shatterline in order to not lose more players, especially after a release such as XDefiant that caters partly towards the same type of FPS gamers that are now playing Shatterline? Well, continuous communication with a small but existing community is a must. I saw a game called Leap that I covered in a video on my channel. I played it, I bought it, It got a disastrous release and more or less died shortly after the release, and one of the reasons was the fact that the devs didn't listen to the community when they discussed the pricing of the game and some other things that was done or added or should have been done or added. Add to that lack of marketing, among other things, and all the hard work from the devs when it comes to the Leap game just went down the drain, you might say. So make sure that all the bigger and minor changes that are being made in the game, alongside with the very much needed feedback from the community before finally launching the game. But again, when it comes to Shatterline, don't wait too long either. I've seen several projects being stuck in early access and never really get a chance to take off or at least get a proper release. And I hope that won't be the case with Shatterline. So will XDefiant outmatch Shatterline? That is to be seen, of course, since XDefiant isn't released yet, but I do believe that XDefiant might become a competitor to Shatterline, but sometimes that isn't necessarily a bad thing, since it can also push developers to work harder to improve the game in order to cope with the competition. There's also a scenario where the games coexist well, since they once again aren't completely in the same field of games. They're both free to play, and Shatterline also have quite some focus on the PvE aspect of the game, as mentioned earlier. Personally, I hope for the later, that as many good titles are possible or are able to make it, meaning getting a community and the possibility to grow and get a healthy player base for years to come. I've said thanks and goodbye to some games that I both played and covered now and then through the years. Talking about Ubisoft, by the way, Hyperscape was one of those games. And in December, a free-to-play Battle Royale game that I played quite some through the years called Ring of Elysium will be sunset. Well, there's reasons, of course, why these kind of things are happening, but once again, from a gamer's perspective, diversity is always welcome, meaning as many good and fun to play titles out there as possible. With that said, feel free to fill in, of course, here what you think. I always read the comments and also try to answer them all. And if you're new to my channel and if you enjoy what you've seen and if you want to watch more of my work, then feel free to subscribe and hit that bell button so you don't miss out when I'm posting a new video on my channel. Thanks a lot for watching and goodbye.